Hi everyone, and welcome to Core Lecture 15. Today, we'll be discussing reading academic works. Before we begin, you'll need the following materials for today's lecture assignment. You'll need one scholarly source, preferably an article, that you plan to use for Project 3, the annotated bibliography. You'll also need access to a document just to do some writing on. The purpose and goals for today's lecture are as follows. We'll identify components of an academic/scholarly article, and I do want to let you know up front, I will be using those two terms interchangeably for this lecture. So if I say scholarly, know it means academic, and if I say academic, it means scholarly as I relate back to the presence of articles. We'll also define and discuss the value of critical reading, and then we'll explore strategies for reading scholarly articles in an engaging, efficient manner. All right, so when I use the phrase academic articles, what do I mean? So previously we have discussed the differences between scholarly and popular sources. Now, we're going to extend that conversation a bit further by specifically looking at academic articles, a type of scholarly publication or a type of scholarly source. Now, that being said, academic articles will appear in peer-reviewed publications. So you'll recall that when we think of scholarly sources, the reason that they take so long and perhaps they might not appear as timely as, let's say, a popular magazine or a newspaper is because they often undergo a far more rigorous revision process. So rather than coming out every week and then making corrections or, noting to readers, oh, by the way, here's an update to this story. Scholarly journals, so think about, some of the examples we looked at, the Journal of Popular Culture, the Journal of Microbiology, things of that sort. They will go through a far more extensive revision process and will actually be reviewed by other experts in the field to ensure that the information is correct and contributes to the body of knowledge that that particular field is looking to achieve. In comparison to edited chapter, edited chapters, books, monographs, other kinds of scholarly publication, articles tend to be a bit shorter in nature, usually about 10 to 40 pages each. Now, like I said, I know that that kind of seems silly, whereas magazine articles tend to be about 5 to 7, so to say, oh, they're shorter, but, they're still 10 to 40 pages. Again, that's in comparison to other types of scholarly publication. So it's not a 200-page book or a 100-page monograph or maybe a 60-page chapter, but it's a 10 to 40-page article. Now, because of that, they typically tend to be very narrow when it comes to their topic focus. So as you're going through the library databases, let's say you're writing on climate change, for example. So you will not find something broadly on the topic of climate change. Rather, you will find the impacts of climate change in Northern California from the years 2000 to 2015. So you are going to get things that are very specific and have a very precise focus. The academic articles also attempt to fill a gap within a discipline's existing scholarship. So recall that with scholarly articles as opposed to popular is that they want to say, what do we still need to learn about this topic? What do we still want to explore more? What does the current body of scholarship, what does it not cover and how can we address that? So with academic articles, you will certainly hear that type of language as opposed to it being just straight up objective reporting like you might get in popular sources, like from a magazine or a newspaper or a mass media TV outlet. And I will also say that academic articles, because they are comparatively niche specific and they are far more focused than other types of publications, especially popular publications, they require critical reading skills, which is what we're going to get into today. I just introduced the term critical reading. So what is it and how does it differ perhaps from reading in general? Critical reading, as opposed to what we would perhaps see as more passive reading, asks the reader to actively engage with the text. So rather than just saying, oh, 25% of college students are unable to pay off their loans. So rather than a passive reading where you would just say, oh, hey, there's that statistic, you would say as a critical reader, how are they getting this information? What does that methodology look like? What's the significance of that? How does that apply to what I am trying to argue or to advocate? So rather than just saying, oh, that's interesting information, you're actively thinking about the information itself, how it's collected, how it's interpreted, how it fits into the research that you yourself are collecting. Now, as you go through a text, critical reading then asks you as the reader to pose questions and critiques to both the author and their argument. As you're going through, you might find yourself saying, oh, that is an interesting conclusion, but it reads more like a slippery slope argument. So I'm curious, if they were to approach it in this way, how might that change the outcome? Or, oh, this is a very interesting way to approach this issue on how they're gathering, you know, the data that they are referencing to support their argument. Or, I wonder if, going back to the earlier example, if I'm writing on climate change and an article I find is about Northern California, how might these results be interpreted in Southern Utah and Nevada? So it really tasks you as the reader to not just passively, I guess, kind of go over the information, but to ask questions and to put in your own 2 cents as you go. Now, I really like this definition. So it's a critical reading is seen as a process of analyzing, interpreting, and evaluating a text through the use of highlighting and making notes as you read. That's also something that I find incredibly important about critical reading, is that it's kind of kinesthetic when you think about it. So rather than, again, just going through and reading the words as they appear on the page or on the screen, critical reading says, hey, make use of pens and pencils, make use of highlighters, actually get your body involved in the process beyond your eyes going from one word to the next. So as you go through and as you start to read various scholarly articles for Project 3, don't just passively read it over. Rather, do so with a pen in hand or a highlighter in hand or post-it notes, or however you prefer to approach the critical reading process. Now, why do critical reading? So as I'm describing it, you might find yourself saying, oh my gosh, well, if this is a more dense, niche specific, perhaps even jargon heavy article, couldn't engaging in critical reading take a ton more time? Well, yes, it does. It can take a little more time than passive reading, but the benefits from it will far exceed any additional time you find that you have to take. So first and foremost, critical reading can help you internalize and extend upon the work, because rather than saying, oh, 25% of students say they can't pay off their student loans. So rather than, you just saying, oh, that's fascinating, or oh, here's that number in this article, you can say, okay, well, yes, they say 25% now, but maybe you notice, hey, this article was published in 2014. What might these statistics look like today? So because you were able to sort of slow your reading process down and think about the content that you're coming across, you can say, how might these numbers apply today? How might these numbers reflect today's student loan situation? It can also aid with content retention, again, because you are more actively engaging and making connections to your own thoughts, your own responses, your own research endeavors. You're going to remember the arguments, the methodologies, and the conclusions with in much greater detail. Now, again, this can help you save time in the long run. So let's say you are going through and you're writing, um, you're working on Project 4, the civic engagement argument. And let's say at this point in the game, you decide to engage in critical reading with all of the sources you include for Project 3. So you become very familiar with the sources that you have annotated for the annotated bibliography. So as you start to write your argument for Project 4, again, the civic engagement argument, rather than saying, oh yeah, I think I remember reading something in one article, but I don't remember which one it's in or what page it's on, because you engaged in critical reading for Project 3, and because you've developed such a familiarity, rather than taking all that time to go through and read through every single article, you're more likely to say, oh yeah, this was in this person's work. This, they talk about it in their methodology section. I'm going to go reference it really quickly. Or, oh, hey, as I'm writing, I remember I had this question in this specific article. And so I'm going to reference that in this section of my own argument. So even though in the initial reading process, critical reading might consume a bit more time, when it comes down to applying those sources, when it comes down to actually using them and incorporating them into your own works, because you've engaged in critical reading, you'll notice that you can reference these sources far more accurately and in a far more timely manner than if you had just read passively. Strategies for critical reading. So there are ways that, you don't have to get bogged down with all of the reading that you have to do. You can certainly approach critical reading in a smart, time efficient manner. So the first thing that you'll want to do, skim first. So skim the article. Do not just jump in and be ready to say, hey, I'm going to read the whole thing in its entirety right now. Don't do that. So when you skim, what you'll want to do is you want to begin by reading the introduction and the conclusion carefully. So you'll say, what this does by reading through word for word the introduction and the conclusion, you can say to yourself, okay, this is the argument that they're going to try and make. So you get that information from the introduction. You can say, okay, this is the argument that they're trying to make, or the concept that they're looking to explore and to test through an experiment. And then you get to the conclusion and you can say, oh, so this is how it actually turned out. The reason that you want to do this is twofold. First and foremost, it lets you know if you even want to read the article in its entirety. Let's say you read the introduction and the conclusion, and you say, well, this kind of seems like an interesting article, but it seems out of my scope. I don't think it would be worth my time to read the 30 pages sandwiched in between the introduction and the conclusion. My time would be better spent reading another article that perhaps is more relevant. So first, it can help you determine if you even want to pursue reading the article in its entirety. Next, if you do decide to pursue the entirety of the article and engage in a critical reading throughout the rest of the text, what this can do is give you a good idea of the key ideas and terms to keep an eye out for. So it will let you know how the work is itself organized, so you will be able to get a sense of where to find certain content and how to navigate that content throughout the article itself. But you can also say, hey, in the introduction and the conclusion, I'm noticing this term or this phrase coming up quite frequently. I need to keep an eye out for it in the body of the work. And so, of course, you can identify key ideas that you could locate in the body of the text. After you've skimmed and after, you've decided, okay, I want to spend time and dedicate time to critically reading this piece, what you want to do is you want to perform a more detailed reading of the body based on the information you gathered in the introduction and the conclusion. So remember, what are the main arguments that the author or authors are trying to support? How are they going about doing that? And how well does that work out for them? So after you've pulled that information from the introduction and the conclusion and identified some key terms and concepts to keep an eye out for, then you can jump into the body of the text. Now, this is, I think, where sort of the kinesthetic learning really comes into play, where you want to make sure that you have a pen or pencil, a highlighter, something to really, again, get more of your body involved. So as you go through the body of the text, you want to make sure that you're using these writing tools to pose questions, to extend a claim, to critique the argument or the author. And so, again, what this does is it helps you bring your own experience and your own understanding into the text and will better help you understand how it's relevant, if it is, to supporting the argument you eventually want to make in Project 4. So as you go through, make use of the margins, make use of that white space to write down your questions or to critique the argument or the author. And it's also important to do it in your own language. You know, I'm not going to see this. I imagine in future classes and in professional situations, your other professors, your bosses are not going to see your reading notes either. And so it's important that you are using language that speaks to you and that is helpful to you. I know that in some of my research, I have quite literally written out OMG when I found something particularly interesting, or something like WTF if I don't agree with what an art author has said, or I find something outlandish. So those notes make sense to me. I know how to incorporate them into my writing based off of sort of those shorthand terms. And so, yeah, it's just important to um, use the language that makes sense to you as you're making notes. And finally, for critical reading, you want to compose a brief summary and reflection, and I would say no more than 50 words on the article. So again, what's the main argument? What is the methodology and what are the conclusions? And this will really help serve as a quick reference. So let's say if you're going through in Project 4 and you say, oh, wow, I wonder if I have any sources that get at this kind of topic or this kind of idea. Well, you can go through, look at your critical reading notes from the articles that you've read, and you can say, hey, yeah, this article talked about it, or a couple of these authors really explored this topic in greater detail. So you don't have to go through and reread the articles again. Rather, you can just review these brief summaries. Okay, let's briefly talk about the lecture assignment. So what I would like you to do is we are going to start gathering content and start generating content for Project 3, the annotated bibliography. Using the library databases, I'd like you to locate one scholarly article that you could or want to use for Project 3. I want you then to perform a critical reading of the text and compose a brief, so about 50-word write-up detailing the following. So this will be a little different than the summary that I suggest that you write when you are engaging in critical reading, but this should also give you a sense of how you see yourself using the source. So in this write-up for the core Lecture 15 assignment, you'll want to include your initial thoughts after you skimmed the article. So, is it relevant? Do you find that it's worth your time? What are some of the key ideas? Does it seem interesting? So, yeah, just what are your initial thoughts after you've skimmed, so reading the introduction and the conclusion? I also want you to include one thought you had while performing a deeper reading of the text. So once you actually get into the body, where is your OMG or I disagree or this is a great idea moment? So write down one thought you had while performing a deeper read of the text, and then also include one question you had regarding the articles. So that can be, like the example I discussed, like, what would this research look like if we applied it to Southern Utah and Southern Nevada? Or, I wonder what the author would say about what's going on today and how they would apply this argument to 2019, perhaps if it's an older article as opposed to 1983. So, I want you to include those. And so, again, just to give you a sense of what does the article look like, how are you responding to it, and how are you applying that to your own thoughts for the topic that you're researching. For your weekly homework, you'll need to include the Core Lecture 15 summary and assignment. And your week 8 homework submission should include the summaries and lecture assignments from core lectures 15, 16, and 17, as well as the summary and lecture assignment of a mini lecture of your choice, and that is all due to Canvas by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, March 3rd. If you have any questions or would like to discuss any of these concepts in greater detail, please feel free to contact me via Canvas DM. All right, everyone, until next time.